Hello and welcome to another Wolftime gaming video. Today I'm going to be painting up the legendary dragon for use in Joan of Arc, which is a game by Mythic Games. This dragon is absolutely huge and I've been putting it off for probably close to a year now because I'm not sure how I've wanted to paint it. But now I'm going to give it a go. Before I get started though, as usual, let's get that kettle on. So if you've picked up this dragon already, you'll know it pretty much comes ready-made. There's just the wings to actually put on. So you just have to gravel the base so it's ready to go. I did notice there's a few just holes in the joints and things where it had been put together. So I used a little bit of green stuff just to hide those holes really, and then spray painted it. And I did that with Wraith Bone, as I've been doing a lot recently with many of the miniatures. It's a great spray by Games Workshop. It's really thin and leaves all the detail there for you to actually see really nicely. So I've gone about things a little bit backwards with this actual painting. I've decided to go with the base first. Usually I paint the miniature first and then do the base after, but I really knew where I wanted to go with the base, and I thought that was the easier side. So to start with, I used Black Templar, which is a contrast paint, and I used this on the actual castle that the dragon stood on, that he smashed to pieces, because I thought it was a decent colour to actually go with. It shows up really light in some areas, and you can see there after he's done, he's looking really good. I then use Administratum Black, which is just another Games Workshop paint, to dry brush over the top of the whole castle. I thought it was a little bit too dark for what I wanted, so I wanted to raise the colour up a little bit and highlight all the edges of the stones and things like that. So it looks really good now. You can see it starts to look really effective. The base to start with, as usual, I've gone with the Rhinox hide, which is a brown base and really nice brown base coat. I use that on pretty much all the miniatures purely because it's a really nice dark muddy sort of a coloured brown, and it's a good point to start to raise the colour up if you wanted to. It's a lot easier to actually bring the colour up lighter than it is to actually go darker on a mini, unless you use the shades and things. But for basing, I thought Rhinox hide really is a really good colour to start with. Once I'd done the whole base, I then wanted to highlight it, and I've done that with Mournfang Brown. It's another Games Workshop paint, and what this does is actually lighten all the raised areas. So I've just dry brushed it on there, and it just brings that colour up a little bit, adds a little bit of definition to the soil. So there's a few different colours there. You look at soil in your garden, it's never just one big block of colour. The next part was the actual path, and to do this I wanted to go really light, as in to make it look like the path had been traversed a lot, so I used a Xandri dust, usually my go-to for this sort of thing, and you can see it starts to stand out really nicely. Now at this point it doesn't really look perfect, but I'm happy with how it's turned out, and I think it's going to look really good. Okay, and now it's starting on painting the actual miniature itself. The first paint I'm using is the Contrast Skeleton Horde. Now this is a very similar sort of colour to Xandri Dust. What I would have done in the past with this type of thing is gone with Xandri Dust and a Shabti Bone as a highlight, but I decided just to go with the contrast paint and see how we get on, really, purely because I've used the main colour. And you can see that whole area now on the bottom of the dragon is completed, and it looks really nice. The second colour I've gone with to go up from there is a contrast black again, the Black Templar, which is what I used on the castle, but in this instance I'm not going to highlight it, just going to use it as the darker area. If you want to follow this sort of a technique, just take your time with it, especially around the areas of that you've put the skeleton horde, but you can see that it's dropped in really nicely. What I've also done is, you can see there, I've gone a little bit darker in a few stripes just to add a little bit of like camouflage. It's not really camouflage, but you see a lot of lizards and things like that have like a darker markings, especially when they're a dark sort of colour, a grey or a black. And you can see those darker markings actually make it look really quite effective, just around the leg areas, and it adds a little bit of difference to it really. So it's not just that one block of colour with, well, say one block of colour with the highlights obviously, but the darker areas just give it a little bit more and start making it look a little bit more effective. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see some old Seraphon models, or lizard men, as you know, the traditionalists would call them. And on there, I've painted up one of the large dinosaurs with this big red stripe down his back, essentially. And that's one of the same thing I'm going for with the dragon. Just contrast Blood Angel's red all the way along, and on the horns and things. Just to give him a really big striking red stripe, and you can see there it's once it's down, it already adds the shading for you. You haven't got to mess about with it. One thing I will say is if you're handling it after, you sometimes do knock a little bit off some areas, so just go over the top of those areas afterwards and when you get towards the end. So one thing I wanted to do really was try and blend that red and the black together, and to do that I've gone with the same sort of idea as I did with the black, and just added a few little extra stripes just to make it a little bit more interesting, make it look like it's all one thing rather than being three completely separate areas of colour. It sort of blends into it a little bit more, and you can see now I've done the whole back end really and along the legs. I think it just adds that little bit more to it really, makes it look a little bit more realistic. There's a lot of these sort of patterns in nature. You don't generally have one block of colour and then another block of colour because they'd stand out a lot, so everything sort of blends a little bit. I used my Fist and Red to get this effect. So then it was onto the mouth, and the first thing I did was the actual tongue itself. And to start with, I used the Screamer Pink, which is just a Games Workshop pink paint. Did need to do a couple of coats of this just to lose the bit of black that where I've gone over it a little bit by accident. While I waited for that to dry, I then moved on to the like stretching skin, the flesh part of his mouth, which I used another contrast paint. In this instance, it was Gulliman Flesh. It's a great paint actually; it's really good. But you can use any sort of flesh paints for this, and it'll make it stand out from the scales a little bit more. To then highlight the tongue, I moved back to the actual tongue itself and used Pink Horror just around the edges really, and just gave it a nice coat just on the raised areas, so it added a little bit of definition to the actual tongue itself, and it wasn't all one block of colour. Made it look a little bit more like it was, you know, there's a few different layers and a little bit more effective on the actual tongue itself. So the next paint was around the teeth itself, and to start with I used a Mech Standard Grey, Mechanica Standard Grey, which is just like quite a dark grey. You can see it was blending into the scales a little bit, a lot more than I'd wanted it to anyway. But you just take your time, go around this, cover all those areas really, and then it can be highlighted after, and you can really make them stand out, or make the teeth stand out afterwards as well. Make it start to look a little bit more realistic. Because one block of colour, it's never really that. You know, teeth in real life aren't one colour. So to highlight that, I used a Administratum Grey, which is the same grey I used earlier on when I dry brushed the castle. In this instance, I'm painting it straight on there, and I'm just picking out the top edges of the teeth really, all the raised areas, and it makes it all stand out. It makes it stand out a lot more from the scales, a lot more from the actual teeth as well. Makes it look like the edges and the curved areas of the teeth are actually raised rather than being one block of colour. So as you can see, it's starting to look really effective around the mouth. But now it's on to the eyes. To start off, I used Avalanche Sunset, which is yellow, and I'm blocking it a little bit with my hands. I do apologise there. But you can see, just take your time, just draw it across the eye, just to essentially get that whole area of the eye and make it more oval shaped rather than round. And don't try and just do the round area. And then to actually do the centre part of the eye, the iris, I used Corvus Black. It's just a black paint, and all I'm doing is drawing it down from top to bottom in a straight line, and it gives you that sort of lizard feel to the actual eyes itself. It looks really good. And then on to basing before we move on to the wings. I used some clump foliage just around the base, just dotting it around really, lots of different areas. Because I thought if I'd use just flock along the base or static grass or anything like that, it would essentially it'd all sort of blend together really and just be one big mass of green, and I didn't want that. With it being this sort of a scale, with it being scaled for like 15mm miniatures, essentially the base is actually covering quite a large area. So I wanted to give it a bit more of interest really, which is why I've gone with the bushes and things like that. Then gone over the whole thing with PVA glue, covering all the mud areas really before we move on to the flocking. One thing I will say with doing this is just take your time if you do use PVA glue around the bases of the miniatures, and you're doing it with the miniature actually stuck there, because you don't want to get it on any of the feet and things like that. I then sprinkled this flock there. It's just a battlefield grass from Army Painter, and just sprinkle that over the whole thing. Try not to get it too much on the bushes, though I did end up getting a little bit, which I had to knock off afterwards. But just sprinkle it around. I used a tweezer to try and get in between the toes, you just saw there. And within the battlefield grass as well, I put a few bits of like wood and things like that to make it a little bit more interesting. It wasn't just one big green area. You can see now the actual main body of the dragon and the base is done. Still a little bit more of a block of green than I'd wanted it to, but I think the base looks okay. I think it works. For what it is really. I don't think that it needs that much more detail on it. Maybe a little bit of scorched area would have worked quite nicely, where the dragon's actually been destroying the castle, but I think it works quite nicely and works quite well. But then we're moving on to the actual wings, which are basically done exactly the same as the rest of the miniature. So started off with the arm parts, I suppose, of the wing, which is all done with Black Templar again. Just went over the whole miniature with this and just took my time, just going over the whole thing, making sure not to get into any of the lower areas, because I wanted those to stand out, and to actually use the skeleton horde, which is the next colour I went on to. Obviously I didn't want to put too much black on there, because I'd not be able to use that skeleton horde in the correct areas. It's really just a guesstimate as to where I wanted to do this. There's no hard and fast rule of where these areas are. There's a lot of miniatures like this painted on the internet. Loads of really well done things. A lot of airbrushing is done. I don't like using airbrushes really. And then it's on to the actual final stage, which was using the skeleton horde, as I previously said. Now this does take absolutely ages, because the wings are so huge. But one thing I will say is using the contrast paints and things like that speeds things up really quickly. If I'd have used Xandri dust and a Shabti bone and things like that and tried to highlight it all myself, it would have taken a long time to do. And the main thing we want to get these painted for is to get them on the tabletop and actually start playing games with them and having them looking good while on the tabletop as well. I'm not here to win competitions. I'm here to, I want to get these miniatures painted. I want to get games in. So the main thing was getting some paint on it, getting it looking to an okay standard, and actually getting them on the tabletop and playing with them. That's why we buy these miniatures at the end of the day. That's the miniature complete. I say miniature, the dragon, the massive dragon, the legendary dragon complete. I think he's looking really good. I quite like how the colours have all blended together. The head's looking really nice, how the red sort of blends with the Black Templar, the Blood Angel's red, and I think that looks really nice. Really pleased with his face. All the highlighting around the scales and things, it's all using these contrast paints. None of it's using different techniques and things. It's just put the contrast paint on. These two thick coats sort of things, or one thick coat, and it really works. The base looks great. Maybe I would have done a little bit of scorched area if I was to do it again, but I'm really pleased and I can actually get some games in with this. I really hope you like the actual miniature. I really enjoyed painting it, even though I left it off for so long. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to see any more videos from me. Watch some of the other videos as well. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.